10 years ago, gates abruptly opened up all over the world. Through these gates, monsters started pouring out, from monstrous beasts, humanoid devils, and even ghostly dragons. Thankfully, on the human side, people dubbed as the Awakened started appearing. These are the individuals who started exhibiting supernatural powers, whether it may be magic, martial arts, and other superhuman abilities. These awakened people became the hunters who hunted down the monsters. But for our protagonist, this doesn't matter. A young teen named Kang Jiyoung is just minding his own business when a large block of diamond slams into his face, knocking him back into the desks and chairs of the classroom. Blood starts pouring out from Jiyoung's mouth and head, staining the floor. 3 other students are standing over him, a brown-haired teen smirking down on him called Thor, one chewing a bubblegum called Sandman, and a white-haired teen leading them with a diamond levitating before his arm called Crystal. Crystal calls Jiyoung a worm and orders him to squirm around. In this awakened specialization high school, Jiyoung is just a loser. Jiyoung's awakened ability is to regenerate, a skill so powerful that it's supposed to be an S-rank ability. Unluckily for Jiyoung, his version of regeneration is just downright undesirable. Anytime he has to regenerate, it hurts like hell. Jiyoung screams and writhes on the ground as his body tries to repair the damage to his cracked skull. Meanwhile, the bullies attack him and laugh at him as he flails around from the pain of his healing. There isn't even any proof of the bullying left once he's healed, thus he has no choice but to just sit at his desk and endure their bullying. The authorities, including the teachers or the police, cannot do anything. In fact, they won't do anything. Why? Well, S-class awakened individuals with strong powers receive special treatment from the government. His 3 bullies with their powers over diamonds, electricity, and earth are all considered S-class individuals. After school, Jiyoung heads back home to the little shop in front of their house. His mom greets him warmly and gives him some food. His mom is the only reason he's still going to the Awakened Specialization High School despite all his bullying. His dad died when he was 5, leaving his mom all alone to handle their failing restaurant and provide for their family's needs. That's why even when his mom asks him how his school is, he has to lie, smile, and assure her that he's doing great. Once he graduates, he can finally become a hunter and get his mom to retire. He should be able to become a C-rank hunter with his ability. His income will be small, but at least they'll be able to live somewhere better. Then he and his mom can finally be happy. It was the 15th of the month, the date of his mom's birthday. It was also the day everything in Jiyoung's life came crashing down. Jiyoung is in shock while he stares at his mother's unconscious body in the hospital. She was on oxygen support, a neck brace supports her neck, and bandages wrapped all over his mom's body. He couldn't even see her face because of the dressing on her head. The bullies in his school had beaten his mom into a vegetative state. A government official tries to explain to Jiyoung that it was an accident, but Jiyoung knows it was no accident. They coincidentally came to their small restaurant where Jiyoung's mom served them. Seeing the woman's youthful appearance, Crystal grabbed his mom's arm and tried to hit on his mom. He tried to flirt with her and showed her that he could even create diamonds, but Jiyoung's mom just pulled back her arm and rejected him. Unfortunately, she accidentally swiped Crystal's phone from the table, causing it to fall to the ground where its screen cracked. Jiyoung's mom hurriedly picks up the phone, apologizes, and even offers to pay for the phone. But Crystal's power goes out of control due to rage and diamonds erupt from the ground, piercing his mom into the air. It was just an accident, the official said. It was a coincidence that they went to their restaurant and Crystal's power went out of control. But Jiyoung knows better. He knows that the bully's power didn't go berserk. Blood starts flowing down Jiyoung's face as his face contorts in anger. He grits his teeth so hard that his teeth crack, shatter, and fall on the floor in pieces. He grabs his neck and starts tearing through his skin. His rage flowing out of him in vicious waves. On the floor splattered from where it's been dropped, his mom's birthday cake gets bathed in his blood. Meanwhile, in the mountains on the outskirts of the city, the 3 bullies are hanging out after school and playing with their powers. Thor worries if it's really okay that they sent an innocent woman to the hospital, but Crystal assures him that it's fine. After all, they're young enough to be protected by the law, and they're also awakened individuals with special privileges on top of that. When Thor still expresses his worry, Crystal glares at him and reminds him that it's not his first time beating someone up. From a distance, a voice suddenly asks them why they did it. The unknown figure angrily marches toward them, and they finally recognize him as Jiyoung. Meanwhile, Jiyoung's eye flashes in anger and he screams again at the bullies, demanding to know why they hurt his mom. Crystal's face brightens as he realizes who Ji-young was talking about, and he just casually compliments Ji-young's mom for being young. Meanwhile, tears and snot flow down Ji-young's face, which is still radiating with anger. Ji-young charges toward them, but Crystal just lifts up his hand and sends a diamond spear through Ji-young's chest. Ji-young grabs the spear with both hands and pulls it out, causing copious amounts of blood to explode everywhere. The hole in his chest slowly healed while he writhed in pain because of his abilities working. He cursed at the bullies and was about to charge again when he noticed that Crystal had created hundreds more diamond spears levitating all around them. With a flick of his finger, Crystal sends the spears crashing down on Ji-young. Despite being pin-cushioned by the spears, Ji-young's rage still wouldn't calm down and he crawled toward the bullies. Crystal smiled at Ji-young's persistence and commands one of his buddies, the brown-haired teen nicknamed Thor, to attack Ji-young. Thor's eye flashes and a bolt of lightning descends from the heavens, striking Ji-young where he stands. Ji-young falls back down to his knees, smoking from the attack and bathing the ground with his blood. The bullies walk beside Ji-young and are about to leave, but Ji-young grabs Crystal's feet. Crystal finally gets annoyed at Ji-young and smashes down on him with his diamond-covered fists. He pounds on Ji-young's body. Wanting to end the pain, Ji-young grabs hold of a large crystal just in front of his chest and pulls himself toward it, impaling himself on the throat. Before he dies, his mind flashes to the memory of his mother, but his regenerative ability kicks in once again, and he is left gasping for air while his throat heals the damage of the spike. Lying down in his probably very priceless diamond coffin, Ji-young comes to a miserable conclusion. He is so utterly powerless. However, he grits his teeth and realizes that this is how his mom probably feels right now. They both cannot move and are stuck in their own bodies. Ji-young grits his teeth once more and punches upward. He will get out. It all doesn't matter. He will get out alive. Ji-young continues punching upwards, gritting through his injuries and through his painful regenerative ability. A long time later, the mountains on the outskirts of the city are still as peaceful as ever. Meanwhile, the television in the city broadcasts an interview with some famous S-rank hunters. The interviewer even compliments his 3 guests who are famous for their kindness and volunteer work. The guests explain that they just feel joy whenever they help out those in need, and they still feel that way. These 3 guests, Ji-young's former bullies, had now graduated and are working as S-class hunters, the best of the best. As for the next question, the interviewer asks them a question about an incident in their past, when they hurt a civilian 5 years ago because of an ability outrage. The leader of the 3 hunters holds his head in grief as tears start flowing down his cheeks. He narrates how when they were still students, he couldn't control his abilities well, so he accidentally hurt his friend's mom. He apologized to his friend, but he couldn't reach him since then. He was about to apologize again in front of the camera when the door to the interviewing area suddenly gets blown in and it rockets right to the hunters. Thankfully, Crystal manages to deflect the door with his arms now reinforced with diamonds. The audience watching the interview all scatter and shout as a monster's silhouette can be seen standing by the broken entrance. With every step of the monster, the floors break. Crystal warily watches the imposing figure approaching them when in an instant, a fist suddenly flies to his face. In a flashback, we once again see Ji-young in his diamond cocoon relentlessly and unendingly punching the diamond above him. He has no idea how much time has passed. Is it a few months, a few years? He will never know. The diamonds before him don't even show a scratch from all his punches. But there is one thing he noticed. His regenerative ability was different from others. The continued injuries triggered an excessive regeneration, and he regenerated into a stronger person than before. Looking at his knuckles, he can see bones peeking through them. His exoskeleton is starting to come out. Inside that grave for 5 years, Ji-young's whole body struggled. He used his feet, his back, and even his head. For 5 years, he destroyed his entire body and regenerated. He only felt pain. His blood splattered, his flesh ripped, his bones broke. The pain was his whole life, and when he regenerates, the pain is also worse than death. And yet, Ji-young continued on for 5 years, until a crack formed. Back in the present, Crystal's face gets bludgeoned by a heavy skeletal fist, and he is flung back into the wall, crashing into it. His 2 sidekicks, Thor and Sandman, couldn't fathom what just happened and who this person was standing before them. A person looking more like a demon than a human, with an exoskeleton all over him, and even half his face is masked with a skull. The person, Ji-young, recalls the last words these bullies told him, way back then 5 years ago, when they told him that he can try murdering them when he manages to escape his diamond prison. Well now, Ji-young's rage is still fresh as ever, and he warns them that he finally got out. However, for the bullies, they couldn't even remember this last interaction with Ji-young, more so connect their weak classmate in the past to this imposing monster before them now. They puzzlingly stare at one another, while Crystal gets back up from behind them. He orders them to just murder the guy, so Thor quickly summons a flash of lightning to hit the enemy. The resulting bolt of electricity caused a massive explosion of power and debris, but Ji-young had managed to endure the attack. Lightning still crackles all over his body, but he grins through it and charges at Thor. Ji-young lunges at Thor with his fists, using blade-like bone protruding from his forearm to spear through Thor. The sharp weapon cuts through Thor's neck, and his decapitated head flies through the air, still containing his shocked face. Crystal and Thor are stunned by this shocking turn of events, and they can't even move as their friend's blood splatters over them. A few seconds later, after Thor's body hit the ground, Sandman finally manages to react, and he sends his power to Ji-young. Pieces of rock, sand, and dirt converge and wrap around Ji-young, imprisoning and crushing him in a ball of earth. Inside his earthly prison, Ji-young grits his teeth once more and counterattacks. His prison explodes into a million tiny pieces, and in an instant, his fist now holds Sandman right by the jaw, popping the bubble gum he seems to have been chewing for 5 years already. His mind goes into alarm at what is about to happen next as Ji-young tears off his jaw. Sandman falls to the ground clutching his brutalized face while Ji-young lifts his sword arm to put him out of his misery. The blade slams into Sandman, finally ending his suffering, but Crystal is now behind Ji-young with his fists ready to bludgeon Ji-young. Ji-young turns around to face him, but this just means the diamond-laden fist crashes into his face. But unlike before, the skull encasing Ji-young's face managed to pierce through Crystal's defenses, and his diamond fists now have cracks running through them. Seeing this travesty, Crystal lifts up his hand and countless diamond spears appear again. Unlike when they were kids when the spears were just surrounding Ji-young, this time the spears are so large and numerous that it surrounds the whole building. Crystal brings down his finger and the innumerable spears come crashing down and converging on Ji-young, making him a human pincushion once more. Crystal stares at Ji-young's mangled corpse, but to his horror, the spikes spearing through his body start to shake as Ji-young tries to stand again. Blood is pouring and dripping all over his wounds, but this just made Ji-young that much more menacing to look at. Not only does he now look like a skeletal demon, but now he's bathed in blood and glaring menacingly at Crystal. Crystal realizes that this isn't over yet, and he encases his whole body in protective diamond armor, with his fists heavy diamond sledgehammers. He brings his sledgehammers to bear and starts pummeling Ji-young. With every punch of his, both bones and diamond crack, and blood splatters all over. He unleashes a combo at Ji-young and ends it with a devastating blow to the head. However, just like back then when they were teenagers, Ji-young once again catches his fists with his mouth. He bites down on it, and unlike before when Ji-young's teeth shattered, this time it was Crystal's arm that shattered. He was horrified at this, realizing that he was not invulnerable anymore to the enemy monster. Ji-young bites down hard on the arm and quickly punches his skeletal sword through Crystal's chest. Crystal couldn't move away since Ji-young was still biting through his fist, and he could only scream in pain from both attacks. In a desperate attempt to get away, Crystal touches the floor and summons a large stalagmite of diamond to sprout and spear through Ji-young. It drags him into the air, but Ji-young's bite on his arm is still so strong that Crystal was forced to cut off his own arm. Holding his now missing arm, Crystal hobbles away from the scene. Unfortunately for him, a diamond spike suddenly spears through him, forcing him to go down. Ji-young had thrown one of his own spears at him. Ji-young menacingly walks toward him, with Crystal screaming at the top of his lungs for him to stop. Of course, Ji-young pays him no mind and subjects him to his own attack, stabbing the myriad diamond spikes he created back at him. Crystal is now the one looking like a pincushion, and he weakly asks the monster before him who he is. In response, Ji-young takes hold of the skull covering half his face and painfully peels it off. Crystal can finally see his whole face, and his mind immediately recalls who this person is before him. It was the weakling they tortured when they were teens and relentlessly called Worm. Half of his face might now be scarred underneath the skull mask, but this person is clearly Worm. Ji-young didn't respond to the insult but just lifted up his fists and struck Crystal once more. He then holds him by the throat and rams his skeletal sword through his mouth and out the back of his head. Ji-young then watches as life slowly disappears from Crystal's eyes. After finally exacting his revenge, the rage seeps out of Ji-young, and he tiredly stands up. He surveys his surroundings and sees the 3 brutalized corpses of his former bullies all lying down in their pools of blood. The whole auditorium was destroyed in their fighting, and Ji-young is the only one left alive in the whole building. The only movement he can see is his own reflection in the pools of blood. Above him, a gray sky peeks through the ruins of the building and a torrent of rain starts to fall. Ji-young falls to his knees, looks up at the rain above him, and feels the water running all over him. He releases a blood-curdling scream, and he starts to cry since after 5 years of just mindless pain, he doesn't know what he'll do next anymore. A little while later, Ji-young is now sitting in the hospital with a warm blanket covering him. He was staring at the prone figure lying down on the hospital bed, and he couldn't believe that his mom was still alive. Somewhere under a clear blue sky, in the middle of the forest, there flickers a gate to another world. Inside this portal is a dark green cave where a group of hunters are just finishing up from hunting monsters. The 4 guys commended the girl in their group since it was her first time going that deep through the gate, and yet she still contributed a lot to the team. The girl bashfully thanks her comrades for looking out for her, but she gets horrified when she notices that the 4 men are now encircling her with an evil and hard glint to their eyes. The guys smirk and tell her that they are far more grateful for her accompanying them, and remind her that no one knows what happens inside the gate. The girl shakes in terror, but the muscular guy just restrains her hands and caresses her face. He tells her that it would take a month for them to get out of there, and he's very excited to spend that month with her. The muscular guy was about to lick her face when all of a sudden, his head flew off and rolled to the ground. The others are horrified at the sudden attack, and they look around to where and who attacked them. Meanwhile, the girl is stunned upon seeing that her savior is a humanoid monster all encased in an exoskeleton. Living up to their names and profession as hunters, the 3 male fighters quickly respond to the presence of another monster and barrage him with attacks. One of them summons multiple fireballs, and another creates a spear of darkness, while the samurai brandishes his katana. The fire and dark mage's attack violently strikes Ji-young, but it barely scratches his exoskeleton. The samurai also attacks and stabs his katana in Ji-young's chest. But to his horror, the katana just breaks. Ji-young counterattacks in a flash, and the samurai is destroyed. The remaining 2 male hunters are horrified at this sudden turn of events. They can't even fathom how such a strong monster like this exists in the gate. Meanwhile, Ji-young just lazily swipes his sword through the 2 males and decapitates them, leaving only the girl left. The girl is shaking and crying in fright in front of the monster. However, the monster just stares at him. She wipes away her tears and thanks the monster for saving her. But her gratitude abruptly stops as her head gets sliced off from her body. Ji-young had attacked one last time. Why did he do this? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to a few days ago. Ji-young was still crying in the auditorium before the people he murdered when someone suddenly talked from afar. The voice tells him that what he did was amazing and asks him how he feels now that he has gotten his revenge. The voice was coming from a blonde-haired woman standing by the door. He asks the woman who she is, and she introduces herself as Sim Jae-yeon, South Korea's Hunter Association head. Ji-young asks her how she knows about him, and what she says shocks him. She had been watching him ever since the incident 5 years ago. He realizes that he must be talking about her mother, and his rage suddenly bursts forth once more. The auditorium explodes as he charges at Jae-yeon. He was about to skewer her, but she just unflinchingly tells him that she can save his mother. These words stopped Ji-young's fists just before he hit her, and the shockwave of his attack sent debris and rocks exploding through the corridor. Ji-young asks her what her words meant, so she clarifies that she can wake up his comatose mother. After all, she is the only S-rank healer in the world. Ji-young had learned from his mistakes, so he asks her how he can be sure she can be trusted. Jae-young gives a mirthless laugh and informs him that she was the one keeping his mother alive while he was stuck under the earth for 5 years. Thinking it over, Ji-young asks her what he wants with him. Jae-young smiles and tells him that there is currently a problem with the world's situation. The hunters that sprouted all over the different countries are now too strong. Most military forces are no match for hunters, and there are even hunters stronger than nuclear forces. Thanks to these strong hunters, the monsters inside the gates have been mostly murdered. However, the gates still did not disappear. The gates now without monsters are being used by pathways by different countries. Nations are using them to fight wars, and the soldiers for these wars are the hunters. Unfortunately for them, South Korea doesn't have enough hunters. They couldn't stop the Japanese hunters from invading. That is, until Ji-young appeared. If South Korea were to respond to Japan with their own hunters, it'll become total war. But a monster attacking hunters shouldn't be a problem. That is why JN is asking Jiyoung to be their monster, all in exchange for saving his mother. Back inside the gate, the group of hunters that Jiyoung just got rid of were the first of his Japanese victims. It was a beautiful summer day in Japan. However, something was brewing inside a particular glass building, the Prime Minister's official residence. Inside, the Prime Minister of Japan has summoned the Minister of Defense to ask him some questions. The old man has his hands clasped before him and calmly asks the young Minister of Defense if there are strong monsters inside the gates. When the Minister of Defense answers in the negative, the Prime Minister then asks him if there are strong hunters in South Korea. The Minister of Defense replies no once again. The Prime Minister suddenly slams his fist on the table and demands to know why their hunters haven't taken over the Korean peninsula if there are no monsters or Korean hunters standing in their way. The veins on his bald head bulge in irritation as he demands an answer from his subordinate. This old menacing-looking man is Ryuzaki Juto, the man leading the country of Japan as its Prime Minister. The Prime Minister apologizes to his superior and promises to rectify the issue. When Prime Minister Judo asks him how he plans to rectify it, the Minister of Defense smiles and declares that he himself will take care of it. This young man is Japan's #1 hunter and Minister of Defense, Ikosai Kajuru. With his simple cape, gold bracers, and one singular earring, Kajuru doesn't look like the dangerous hunter that he actually is. A singular lock of white hair in the shape of the moon is also prominently displayed above the rest of his dark hair, a clue to his style and technique. After his meeting, Defense Minister Kajuru orders his secretary to prepare his sword. He will go alone inside the gates. His secretary nervously remarks that the hunters they all sent inside the gates were all elites, so it would be wise for him to go along with the others. However, Kajuru just stops walking and asks her if he looks like the person who would need something like that. Sensing his dangerous aura, the secretary quickly apologizes and prepares his sword. A few hours later, Kajuru had passed through the gate in Japan's countryside and is now in the lands beyond. He is walking through the cave where the other Japanese hunters went missing, and he wonders what could have happened to his useless subordinates. Numerous weak and small monsters attack him, but he just passes through them after cutting them to ribbons with his sword. He knows that his subordinate hunters couldn't have died against weak monsters like those. While wondering what could possibly be inside the cave, he finally gets to the end. Inside, the Japanese hunters' bloody corpses are all piled up on one another, and sitting on top of them is a humanoid skeletal monster. Fury envelopes Kajuru, and in one quick motion, he draws his sword from his sheath and is striking at the monster. To his utter surprise, his sword was stopped by the monster's own skeletal sword attached to its hand and its armored forearm. Kajuru was insulted that this measly monster dares to block his sword, and he fluidly dodges the monster's own attack. He counterattacks by punching the monster's chest, creating some distance between them, and prepares his sword for one of his techniques. In one continuous motion, he utilizes one of his skills, Kajuru First Moon, and slices at the monster. Despite managing to block it, the monster was blown back by the strength of the attack and coughed up blood. Kajuru isn't finished yet and releases his second technique, Second Moon. Pure energy released by his swords directly impacts the skeletal monster, and it was blown once again into the cave wall. Kajuru compliments the monster's sturdiness for still being in one piece, and he uses his third technique, Third Moon, to slash at the monster by the wall. This time, the monster manages to dodge his sword and attack with his own. The skeletal sword is about to hit Kajuru on the neck and decapitate him when he nonchalantly reverses the direction of his katana and chops off the monster's arm. The skeletal monster's exoskeleton might be sturdy, but he tells it that his katana can slice even through diamonds. With that, he decapitates the skeletal monster, who falls to the ground. Kajuru sheaths his sword while wondering how the elite hunters of his country lost to something like this. He was about to walk away, leaving Jiyoung's body and decapitated head on the cave floor. Jiyoung's eyes were blank, as if he was genuinely dead, but inside, his mind was remembering his childhood, especially his dad. His dad was always busy because of work, but he was a very warm and friendly man. He had always liked that about him. One day, he and his mom happily welcomed his dad, who was just coming home from work with a box of fried chicken. He ran across the street to hug his father, not noticing the incoming truck. His dad dropped the chicken and came running towards him too. The last thing he saw of his father alive was him pushing him back and the truck's headlight bathing his father in light. His dad passed away because of him. With his death, his business went under in Jiyoung and his mom ended up with a huge debt. His mom's soft hands became rough from scrubbing dishes and doing work in their dwindling restaurant. When he asked his mom if she was okay, his mom always just kindly smiled at him and assured him that she was fine. But every night, Jiyoung knew the truth. He couldn't sleep and tears fell from his eyes because he could hear his mom silently crying beside him. His mom was crying, and it was all because of him. Days later, he realized that someone like him shouldn't live anymore, and his shaking hands held the box cutter. A few minutes later, his mom was bringing him dinner when she abruptly dropped the tray when she saw what her son was doing. Jiyoung was crying but smiling as he held his injured hand before him. He happily tells his mom that he might be unawakened. His wrist slowly heals and the TV blares about an interview with Korea's #1 hunter, a crystal named Jumgang. Jiyoung hugs his mom and declares that just like the guy on the TV, he'll become a hunter and make them rich and happy. But that's not what happened. Years later and now, his mom is comatose in the hospital. This memory brings back life in Jiyoung's eye. He also recalls his conversation with Jaeyeon, where she told him that the world's balance is already broken. Many nations have already been conquered by hunters. Currently, their biggest enemy is Japan. That's why they wanted him to become their country's monster and hunt Japan's strongest hunters. Well, he had just fought with one of Japan's strongest hunters. Kageru was trying to think of what his next move would be. Kageru mindlessly realizes that he used up too much time with the skeletal monster, and it looks like he would have to go to South Korea himself and capture the country. Meanwhile, he doesn't notice that Jiyoung's decapitated head is slowly moving behind him and crawling toward him. He only finds out when Jiyoung suddenly bites through his leg, surprising him. Looking at the head attacking him, Kageru can see a new skeleton growing out of the head, and he realizes that his enemy must have regeneration. This doesn't make sense though, since he already cut off the head. Meanwhile, Jiyoung continues to chomp down on Kageru's leg, eliciting a painful scream from Kageru. Kageru slices at Jiyoung's face, escaping his bite, and he finally takes Jiyoung seriously. A moon forms on Kageru's forehead, his eyes light up like lightning, and moonlight reflects through his sword. The symbol of his technique illuminates the very ground they are standing on, and in an instant, Kageru vanishes. Jiyoung can only sense flickers of Kageru running all around him. Kageru then activates his most powerful attack, Kageru Fatal 12th Moon, and the numerous silhouettes of Kageru simultaneously attack Jiyoung. Jiyoung couldn't even react as his whole body gets minced by Kageru's katana. The pressure and waves created by his technique were so powerful that the slashes travel and reverberate throughout the tunnel and into the gate. The slashes escaped the gate back to Earth, and the whole forest mountainside was waylaid by the attack. On the other side of the gate inside the cave, the roof was carved in moon-like patterns and the floor was diced. Meanwhile, Kageru shakily walks away from his devastating attack, still enduring the injury on his ankle. He realizes that he might need healing when all of a sudden, a spike of bone hits his other leg. He nervously laughs while behind him, the skeletal hand where the bone spike erupted from is shakingly pointing toward him. Attached to the skeletal hand is a battered yet menacing-looking skeleton still trying to crawl toward him. Kageru shakes from the attack and the realization that Jiyoung is still regenerating. He cannot believe that Jiyoung is still trying to fight despite the large difference in strength between them. He grips his katana once more and charges back at Jiyoung with a shout. A few days later, the gate in the countryside of Japan is surrounded by numerous hunters. The Ministry of Defense's elite hunters are all there. On the front with his arms crossed is Japan's Prime Minister himself, Judo. Besides him, Kageru's secretary asks the Prime Minister if they really need that much firepower. Prime Minister Judo replies that it's been 3 days since Kageru went in. Since he still hasn't returned, they need to check on him. After all, Kageru is still Japan's #1 hunter. All of a sudden, his speech is interrupted when a head rolls out of the gate. It was Kageru's head. Then, a skeletal monster walks out of the gate and into Japan itself. Judo was shocked at this sudden turn of events, but his head abruptly flew off, detached from his body. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, a conversation is also being held at the Korean Hunter Association headquarters. A subordinate is telling Jaeyeon that since Jiyoung murdered Jumgang's son, then it would be bad if he found out. And yet, is that a good enough reason to send Jiyoung to Japan? Jaeyeon smiles and replies to his subordinate, whether he's not even remotely curious. Who would win? The ever-regenerating Jiyoung or Japan's strongest hunter? In Japan, Prime Minister Judo's head abruptly reattaches itself to his body, and his flaming fist suddenly punches Ji-young to the ground. The punch caused an explosion so large that it seemed a comet had fallen right at the two combatants. Ji-young is now unconscious on the ground with Judo standing over him, with lava dripping out of his fists and burning holes throughout his clothes. After all, Judo is not just the Prime Minister of Japan. He is also an SSS rank hunter and Japan's number 0. His bald head was flaming in anger, while the cut on his neck had already miraculously healed, thanks to the magma-like nature of his body. Meanwhile, Ji-young lies before him, defeated and stunned by Minister Judo's singular but powerful attack. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, give a like and subscribe for more videos. See you next time.